Price. I've been a tabletop designer for about 15 years or so. The majority of my work has been with White Wolf and Onyx Path, working on the noun the verb type games. But I've also freelanced for Green Ronin, I've freelanced for Paizo, for Wizards, for many companies under the sun in the tabletop role-playing game industry. And I designed the Storypath system for Onyx Path as their home system.
Hi, I'm your surprise guest, Jacqueline Brick. I have been a designer for, I think, 5 or 6 years now. I broke into freelancing with Vampire the Requiem 2nd Edition. I have also worked on Changeling the Lost 2nd Edition, Demon the Descent, Exalted 3rd Edition, a bunch of other games with Onyx Path. I am also the English language editor for Cult Divinity Lost, and I freelanced with companies such as Genesis of Legend, Wizards of the Coast for Magic the Gathering, and Ulysses Spele. So we have like a combined 25 years of experience between us. So we are delighted to have this panel for you.
Absolutely.
Quick show of hands, how many people in the audience have played any other tabletop game besides D&D? Oh,
wonderful.
Yes. Hooray!
It's better than my last panel. That's good. Dungeons and Dragons, it does one type of game very well, and that game is combat simulator dungeon crawl.
I like to call this Hit Monster Get Treasure.
Yeah.
That is your core, what we refer to as the core gameplay loop.
Yeah.
Is Hit Monster Get Treasure.
And that is a perfectly fine core gameplay loop, but it doesn't do things other than that very well. Like you can't do social intrigue very well, you can't do that. And they have systems for that now in later editions, but they're not robust and they're not the core, they don't feed into the core gameplay loop, like Jack said.
Yeah. We're gonna be using sort of terms of art like core gameplay loop throughout this panel. So if you have any questions at any point in time, like what do you mean when you say that? Please raise your hand and we'll be happy to answer them for you.
Sure. So
Neil, how do you design a system?
Well, the first thing you should probably do is think of your high concept of it. The thing, game design is as much project management as it is actually getting down and having mechanical knowledge. And by the by, you may think to yourself, oh, I'm not a mechanical designer, I'm not that great at it, but I want to dip my toes in there. It's fine. Like you are now blessed and you're now all game designers. There's no one other than me is going to tell you that you are. And that's cool, that's fine. You have to not be afraid to get your hands dirty. Role-playing games aren't novels. You don't sit there and just write prose for them, they are games. And even the DM, even all the players are interacting with it on a mechanical level.
This is one of the biggest pitfalls I actually see in first-time game designers is the idea that, oh, I have to have a full 1,000-year history for all the players to interact with, and I have to have all these characters that have their own motivations, and I have to know what happens at the end of each of their story. No. It is more akin to, I guess, setting up dominoes than writing a novel. The idea is that you want to have enough things for the players to interact with, or even enough things for the GM to go, oh, I could make something for my players to interact with your game.
As part of scoping the work, you have to realize that you don't have to produce a 256-page full-color core rulebook in hardback and then get several thousand copies. You don't need to do that. Games can be as small as a page, and I think actually Jax is designed like card-sized games. Yeah.
There is actually a competition called the 200-word RPG competition where you design an RPG in 200 words or less. I'm actually one of the organizers for that. It should be coming up later this year, so keep an eye out for that. Hey, Neil, what does scoping the work mean?
Scoping the work, to me at least, it means you should think about your high concept of the game and what you want that core gameplay loop to actually look like. And you should think about whether you want it, a number of things, like whether you want it to be just a game that's for one-shots, people sitting at a table for 3 to 4 hours, whether it's a game for just 5 minutes or 15 minutes, or whether you want it to be have the legs to go for a multi-year campaign. or something like that. And that's ambitious, obviously, it's bigger, but if you just want to do one thing really, really well and evoke a specific experience, a lot of times shorter is better, and you always want to err on the side of simplicity.
Yep. How many of you have played Honey Heist by Grant Howitt? Awesome. Can somebody tell me what the core gameplay loop of Honey Heist is? No? Okay, Neil, what's the core gameplay loop of Honey Heist?
I've only read it. I haven't actually played it.
Cool. The core gameplay loop of Honey Heist is be a bear, get treasure. That is the core gameplay loop. It is literally a one-page game, and you two know this. It is literally a one-page game about bears doing heists. And it's not, it has some little hand-drawn art. It's not complicated. It's not it's not a Wizards of the Coast production. It has sold more than 5 million copies. That's a lot. That's a lot in the tabletop industry, let alone in the publishing industry. Like, Honey Heist, I think, was actually the first game that Critical Role, God save me, played other than D&D.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
You don't, a lot of times when people go into game design, another mistake I see people make is, I'm going to make the next D&D. And while Neil is here to tell you are a game designer, and I agree with him, I'm here to crush your dreams and tell you are not going to make the next D&D. I'm very sorry about that. The reason you are not going to make the next D&D is because Hasbro has put millions of dollars and countless hours into causing D&D to be what it is. You do not have that kind of money. I'm sorry, that's capitalism. What you can make is the coolest, am I allowed to swear on this panel?
Sure.
What you can make is the coolest fucking thing that you have ever made. And other people are going to see this and go, oh wow, that's the coolest fucking thing I've ever seen. And it doesn't have to be millions of people, because something you make, and this is going to sound trite, I'm sorry, something you make is something that has never been made before. That is something I want you to keep in mind while you're designing your games. Sure, there might be a bunch of other games about medieval combat, but yours is going to do something different. So keep that in mind. Hey Neil, how did you get into game design?
I got into game design because I was originally one of those folks who's like, I just want to write prose. I don't want to do game mechanics. I'm not good at them. And I wanted to contribute to the lore of a lot of games that I really enjoyed, and I did an all call for writers, and I submitted, and I shot my shot. It was 500 words of prose and 500 words of mechanics, and I followed that to the letter because I was given some inside baseball that when a company asks you to do something like that, RPGs are technical writing, and you should follow that to the letter. It is as much a test of what you do as it is your ability to follow directions. So I did that. And my mechanics were up to snuff. And over the years, I just started reading more and more games and really enjoying them. And then just moving into the space more and becoming more comfortable designing mechanics.
While we're on the subject, hey Neil, what's an all call and where can we find one?
An all call is usually put on by a company, but sometimes it's put on by individual developers or individual designers. It is basically just a request for submission of work to you, to the person, and it's sort of soliciting them and showing them your stuff in case they would like to hire you as a writer or as an editor or as various other things. If you ever submit to an all call, I think the magic number to shoot for is about 1,000 words. That's enough to get a sense of someone's writing and someone's mechanical design ability, but not enough that you feel totally uncomfortable sending it out essentially for free.
As an addendum, the magic number, while Neil is correct, if they don't have a number on the all call, the magic number is whatever the company says it is, because again, an all call is a way to show your ability to follow directions while also being creative. I know some people who have submitted to companies and been like, oh well, I can't fit my brilliant idea in 1,000 words, so I'm just going to send them like 10,000 words and they'll see how good of a writer I am. No, don't do that. Please don't do that.
Yeah, once again, role-playing games are typically technical manuals in the truest sense. They use a specific terminology that's put down in a specific format to a specific word count. And the key word there is specific.
Yes.
And when a company asks you for something in an all call, no more, no less than what they are asking for. Because, again, it is as much a test of your ability to design as it is to read.
Yes. Another great way to get into game design, and this is how I got into a lot of my self-published work. Frick, I left my cards in the LARP room, and now I feel silly. That's okay. I got into a lot of my self-published work through itch.io, if you're familiar with it. It's itch.io. A lot of people host game jams on the site. A lot of tabletop people host game jams. Write a game for a game jam. Set up a storefront. It takes like 15 minutes. It's a great way to get your stuff out there. It's a great way to practice and, you know, see what, really play around with systems and see what people are interested in.
Yeah, and itch.io hosts everything from, you know, huge core books that are full color and hundreds of pages to one-page games.
Yep, I have so many one-page games on itch.io right now.
So when I start designing, when you start designing a game, Jax, what do you think of? What is the first thing that you do?
So I actually want to go a little bit into high concept because we've been talking about high concept for a little bit. A lot of my best games, and this is going to sound ridiculous, and I'm really sorry, a lot of my best games are based on nightmares I've had. And something I try to do is evoke the feeling of the nightmare, which we can split into two things called theme and mood. Okay, I know we've been smack talking D&D a little bit, but the book that actually made me into a horror writer, because I primarily write horror games, is Heroes of Horror for D&D 3rd edition. And I know, we just talked about how D&D only does one thing well, and it does, because Heroes of Horror also has an entire chapter on the new mechanic. Do you remember the new mechanic, Neil?
No, I don't.
It's called Taint.
Ha!
Yes, no. The land is full of taint, Neil. The monsters are soul locked into their bodies by taint.
Oh my God.
Don't use taint in your game. Yes.
What was that website again?
Heroes of Horror. Itch.io, yes.
Yep, that's it. Just plug it into your browser and hit enter. ITCH.
Like as in itchy.
Yeah.
That's okay.
That's okay.
ITCH.io.
Yep.
Do you have any other questions? Because like this is technically supposed to be a game design workshop, but it's not really a workshop space. So like if you have any questions or there's anything you want to answer, us to answer, we'll take it. We're just rambling right now.
Just raise your hand and throw it out.
Please.
Otherwise, we'll talk for the time. Sure.
At what point do you recognize you have a third column mechanic in the game? Because I've noticed, like in D&D, we have a lot of built-in supplementary rules where we try to cram it into the system. It doesn't really work, right?
A third cog mechanic, is that what you called it? Yeah. So D&D, like we said, has that core gameplay loop and does it very well, but doesn't do stuff other than that. So what a lot of designers, especially in the 3.5 era, especially in a little bit more into the 5e era now, not so much in 4e for whatever reason, would design kind of bespoke little systems to bolt onto that core gameplay loop. And for various reasons, because the core gameplay loop was not originally designed to be innovated upon or to encompass those additional systems, they always did feel very tacked on. Taint. So when you recognize it, when you recognize that you have a third wheel mechanic, it's like pornography. You'll know it when you see it, because it doesn't feed into that core gameplay loop, and it doesn't come up unless you specifically like.
Neil,
yank
you'll
the
know
play.
obscenity when you see it, not pornography. How dare you flame our audience's ears with that word?
Oh, forgive me, Justice. Was it Justice Brennan who said that?
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, forgive me, Justice Brennan. But you'll have to yank players towards it. They won't engage with it as part of the core gameplay loop, and they won't feed into it, and there won't be any systems that
Yeah.
burgeon off it.
There are a couple of systems that are actually incredibly modular. D&D is not what we call a modular system, but something like, for example, Powered by the Apocalypse, Forged in the Dark, tend to be a little bit more modular because they're more meta systems, I think.
Yeah.
I was thinking more along the lines of you're doing this by yourself a lot of the time, and you're really dead set on something. At what point do you have to simply go, I've put in weeks into my life with this, and I need to toss it in the bin?
You're asking about the sunk cost fallacy. Okay, here's what you want to do. You want to get yourself a responsibility buddy. I'm serious. You want to get someone who is willing to look over your work and go, okay, I like this, but this doesn't make any sense where it is. I wrote a solo game recently, a game that's meant to be played by yourself in a journal, and it's about a person who is an apocalypse maiden. If you're familiar with TV tropes, it's the person who's, destined to end the world or whatever. And I wanted it to be a game, a conversation between the apocalypse maiden and sort of the spirit of the world. Mm-hmm. And my prose wasn't going anywhere, because it's sort of a question and answer game, right? There's no dice or anything, but you're conversing with these prompts that you get in the game. And I was like, I don't understand why my prose isn't going anywhere. What's the problem? And I showed it to my friend who's a music teacher. He's like, well, it's not flowing because there's no tension here. There's no reason why don't you have this person talk to the cosmic horror they're summoning instead of to the world? And then afterwards, the game is now 30 pages. So that worked. Sometimes you really just need an outside view and Neil and I tend to work with other freelancers, so being able to bounce stuff off each other is incredibly helpful. Because while game design can be a solitary pursuit, at the end of the day, you're writing something for other people to engage with, so you want to show other people. Also, always listen to your playtesters.
Yep.
Sometimes they'll have dumb ideas, but don't be Caleb Stokes. God love him. I love Caleb Stokes. I love Heaven on Games. I love Red Markets. By the way, check out Red Markets. It's a zombie game where the real horror is capitalism. It's very good. But he has a sidebar in Red Markets, which is, playtesters didn't like this mechanic that I put in the game, but I'm keeping it in, and here's 3 paragraphs why. Probably before you get to that point is where you should rethink that mechanic.
Yeah, if you find yourself justifying why the playtesters are fools and you are a genius, and if only you could understand my genius, then you would be on board with me.
Yeah.
You've gone a little too far.
Okay. Yeah, no, exactly.
Yes.
Would you have advice for people who have the opposite problem where they tend to throw things out?
Hi, I have that problem. Neil also has that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Neil, I remember you having this problem when you wrote the Loyalists and the Huntsman.
I did.
For Changeling. So you want to talk a little bit about that? Because that'll actually take us nicely into theme and mood a little bit.
Sure. So we talked a little bit about high concept. I don't know how many people in here, show of hands, have played Changeling the Lost? That all have read it? Yeah. Changeling the Lost is a game where you are a changeling. You've been kidnapped by the true Fae and taken from your life and taken to Arcadia. It's an urban fantasy game, so it's modern day. But
urban fantasy horror.
Yeah, but you've been taken to a fantasy realm, and you breathe of the air there, and you eat of the food, and you drink of the water, and it changes you.
Yep.
And the true Fae have shaped you into something that suits their whims. Perhaps you were their hunting dog, or perhaps you were just an elaborate candle in their study.
Or you were their lover, which becomes very complicated.
Yeah. And you escaped. You managed to get out of Arcadia. You managed to push through, and you're back in the real world, and you are accompanied by essentially friends and bands of survivors that you associate with, other changelings. And so it's a metaphor, and it's very open about this. It's a metaphor for abuse. It's
Sure
a metaphor
is.
for how people survive abuse, for their reactions to it, and for how they engage with it.
Side note before Neil continues, this game saved both of our lives, so it's very important to us, which is why we want to talk about how Neil sort of struggled with almost throwing out a really important part of the system.
Right. So I wanted to address loyalists, and I wanted to address unsympathetic reactions to trauma, and reactions to trauma that were kind of, I hate to phrase it this way, but objectively bad. Things
Harmful.
There we go. Things that are harmful, and things that you sort of, some of them involved like slight judgment calls on people, like saying, just because you have endured trauma doesn't give you the right to traumatize others.
Yep.
And things like that. And the developer at the time, when I started writing that, she had a very bad reaction to that and to that concept.
Which one was this?
This is Olivia.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not the
Not the
ones
current
who,
developer,
Yes,
no.
not the current developer. And some of the other playtesters and some of the other designers had a serious problem with saying that any reaction, not every reaction to abuse is justified or is
Helpful.
Helpful, yeah. And I struggled with it, and I thought about it, and I was like, I want to write something that's actually true to myself, and it's actually true to my experiences and my trauma and what I see out in the world. And so the loyalists are groups of changelings who sometimes they react to their endurance in Arcadia by destroying everything that could attract the true Fae, which means they eat dreams, and they force people to not be exciting, to not be vivacious. There's privateers who actually capture other changelings and sell them to the true Fae, so the true Fae won't capture them and take them back. And then there's true loyalists who, and they're the ones who get the most crapped upon. They're the people who go back to the true Fae willingly after they've escaped. And every other part of changeling society is like, you are the worst of the worst, you are betrayers. And all I can think about when I was writing that is how people react to someone who goes back to their abuser after they've escaped the situation. They're like, well, you know what you're walking into, you deserve that. And I wanted to make a comment on that and to show what that's all about and the various reasons you might go in there. So
Yeah. So basically, developers changed, and the developer of the book that wound up being put out, Rose Bailey, actually asked me to look over loyalists, because at the time I was the one writing the safety rules for Changeling. I was the one writing, hey, here's how you safely deal with the themes and mood of Changeling the Lost. And I loved what Neil wrote because it felt true to me too, because I have also had experiences like that. And we kind of put a little pressure on him to keep it in. So again, the answer is really the same. Show someone else. Like, if you are having trouble pushing forward with a thing you want to create, and it's not obviously, terrible or bigoted, and I hate that I have to say that, but like, someone on Twitter is going to see this and be like, oh my God, she's saying that if you feel like your game is terrible and it's bigoted, get someone else to say that, it's fine. No, that's not what I'm saying. If you're nervous about your game, if you don't feel like your game is good enough, if you don't feel like something you're writing is good enough, ask someone else to look over for it. Ask someone else to look over it. I know I just stumbled over my words, but I promise I'm an editor. And the job of an editor is to go over a game and be like, this is great, this is great, this is great, this could use some work, this is great, etc. And like, so many of your friends will just be really happy for like, hey, I'm working on something. Do you want to look at it? Like, yeah.
Not a week goes by that I don't have two different friends and colleagues pinging me like, hey, can I get your opinion on a mechanic?
Yep.
And, always be mindful of the time and the effort that you put into things and what that is. And that's actually a very good point that I want to emphasize early on. Work is work, and work should be compensated.
Yep.
And even if you're asking someone to play test something for you, they should be compensated. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be monetary.
Buy them a drink.
Yeah, buy them a drink, buy them dinner, say, hey, I'm going to hold a game night. I'd love for you to play test the thing. A lot of times you can just, you can offer, if someone's just doing something for a couple hours, you can say, hey, I'll give you a credit in the final book, and I'll give you a free PDF of it. And they're like, cool,
Yep.
that's fine. And that's fine. That's fair compensation. But always be mindful of what you're asking other people to do in the service of your game.
Yep. Also, a lot of times people are like, oh, I put my game up on itch or drive-through for like pay what you want or whatever, but now I think it's really good and I want to sell it. You can always change the price.
Yeah.
It's fine. Don't worry about that. I want to say something real quick about theme and mood, and then I want to get to you because I see your hand. Changeling the Lost. The Lost, yes.
Yeah, if you go to the charity auction that's going to be held tomorrow, there's a deluxe edition of the book that is signed by multiple authors, and I will.
You're going to get me to sign it too?
I'll get you to them so you can sign it too.
Okay, because I designed all of the kits,
Yes.
so I should sign it. You're welcome. Yes, so something that you'll notice got very impassioned about the feel of the Loyalists, because Loyalists should both feel like dark mirrors of changelings, but should also be sympathetic while also being unsympathetic in a way. You want to get that uncanny, for something like that, or for Nefandi, which are my favorite, you want to get that uncanny valley feel of, oh my God, that's so awful, but also that could be me if like two things were different.
There, but for the grace of God, go on.
Yes. I think that was actually your title for that section, wasn't it?
That was the description that the changelings who were actually like self-actualized and thought about it, how they reacted to true loyalists. You're like, in a different world, I would have been you.
But this sort of feeling compromises two things, theme and mood, and this is actually what Heroes of Horror taught me more than anything else. This is part of your high concept being your sort of elevator pitch for your game. Your theme is what it's about, right? It's not, the theme of Changeling the Lost is not changelings, but the theme of Changeling the Lost is being dumped back into a new life after you were taken out of your old one. It is a theme of loss. It is a theme of strangeness and also familiarity. Duality is another really good way of describing the theme of Changeling. The mood of Changeling is sort of how you play that out. So this could very easily be comic, right? Because it could be sort of a comic parlor farce misunderstanding of, oh my God, this fairy took me out of my life and put someone else in my place, and now I have to go back and convince my wife through a series of hilarious escapades that I'm the real person. But that's, I mean, you can play a Changeling game like that, but that's not the core feeling of Changeling. The core feeling of Changeling is regret, right? It is being lost. It's the feeling of not knowing how to cope now that you've had this incredibly... How do you even explain that to someone? And what if they don't believe you? So...
Yeah. So pinning down your theme and mood is critical to any aspect of game design. Your high concept... the high concept of your game can be a metaphor for something else. That's totally fine. D&D isn't really a metaphor for much. But... like Jax was talking about Red Markets earlier, it's a zombie survival game, but it's a metaphor for the ravages of capitalism and what that does to people.
It is not shy about that either.
No, it's not. You don't have to be subtle about it. You can put your high concept into, and you can put your high concept and your metaphor into subtext, or you can put it in a text.
Something we should note here, all games are political. You are never going to escape anyone's politics in any game. It's just because everything is political.
Yeah. Someone saying, why do you have to put politics into the game is making it political themselves.
They mean that why do you put politics that I don't like
Exactly.
in the game? Yeah. But yes, you're... okay, I answered your question. I saw a hand back there.
So you've been talking a lot about making sure that you validate early ideas and making sure that your game's kind of going in the right direction. Do you have any tools or, I guess, websites that you use essentially to crowdsource multiple things? Are you aware of anything that multiple ideas for if you're going in the right direction?
That's a great question, actually. I really love that. I am going to suggest Itch.io again because a lot of people put out what's called ash cans, which are sort of pre-first edition versions of their game, and they put them out for free or reduced price with the understanding that you will be providing feedback.
Yeah, that's a great way to do it. Once you've started, there's a lot of Twitter calls that people do in the tabletop role-playing Twitter is getting bigger and bigger by the day.
Yes.
And eventually, I know that there are several writers' discords out there where you can just sort of join and meet other writers and throw stuff out for them to look at. And you shouldn't be precious about your mechanics entirely. And don't be afraid of that someone's going to steal your mechanic. They won't, and if they do, it's actually a compliment. I have stolen many a mechanic from many a great designer.
Yeah. And there are people who will get twitchy about it, and that's fine. You don't have to follow them.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously credit. If you're using a major mechanic from someone, please credit them in your book.
Yeah.
I wrote a solo RPG recently called Scare B&B, which is about a ghost haunting a bed and breakfast. And just because my friends Jay and Jamila were putting out a game about ghosts in a mansion, heartwarming game about ghosts living together in a mansion, I wanted to make sure that they didn't think I was trying to rip them off. And I'm like, look, your Kickstarter is happening now. I'd like to be able to credit you in my game so people see it, so I can link them to your page. Is that cool? And they were like, oh, yeah, absolutely. So.
Yeah. Be careful of the opposite thing, too. Just to give you an anecdote, I worked a little bit on a role-playing game called Weapons of the Gods, and then I edited Legends of the Wulin, which was the sort of successor game about Chinese martial arts and the wandering hero type that's common to wuxia fiction. And the core mechanics were designed by a wonderful game designer named Jenna Moran. And she created something called lore sheets, which are essentially a list of character traits you can pick up by spending XP, but also elements of the story that you can invest in and purchase by buying it. And I loved it because you have the specific slice of the setting that you basically buy into directly with your experience and bring more into the story. And I thought it was super elegant. But then when I was designing some of the core mechanics for Trinity and Scion, I wanted a lore sheet feeling, but I was like, I feel really uncomfortable stealing lore sheets. And then, so I came up with through a lot of iterations, a mechanic that's somewhat similar, but not quite. And then Vampire 5th Edition came out, and the designer of that just flat up lifted lore sheets, slammed them down in the game, and said, thanks, Jenna Moran. And I was like, fucking god.
Yeah. Sorry?
Speaking of stuff like that, how the heck does copyright work in this? Mechanics copyright?
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
That is outside the scope of our panel.
So D20 has the open game license, which has very specific rules and stipulations as to what you're allowed to put out as a third-party product. But it's written very smartly because, again, Hasbro has top-notch lawyers who get thrown millions of dollars at to do that sort of thing, and it's is very perfectly designed to generate third-party content that will again feed into the core D&D behemoth.
Yep.
Most of my best D&D books are not made by wizards; they're made by other people, and I'm like, yeah, and that's fine. That's great. That's the way it does. The sort of rule of thumb I would go with, and you should not go with that without consulting a lawyer, really, but the rule of thumb I go with is that small individual mechanics are whatever, or an idea, or a gameplay loop that you want to sort of lift and iterate on. All RPG design is iterative. Everyone is standing atop shoulders of giants and progressively getting higher and higher as time goes on. But if you're lifting large chunks of like very bespoke text, if you're lifting, well, actually don't lift text. If you're lifting chunks of bespoke mechanics that have names on them, If you're looking at that sort of thing, or you even want to lift an entire system, that should be credited. And ideally, you should contact the author of that and just say, hey, I'm writing this game, blah, 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 blah. Can I borrow this mechanic?
If you're not sure, ask. There's a lot of systems that are open game license. PBTA, Forged in the Dark, Descended from the Queen, Storyteller's Vault, any and all of those. They have their rules, and you can very easily look those up. I saw a couple hands in front, and I also saw a hand in back. Let's start in the back, because you've had your hand up the longest.
I just wanted to add the idea that basically any genre that you've ever heard of is just something that somebody did and then copied it up time and became a genre.
Yep.
There is nothing new under the sun.
I guess my message is that everyone knows it's 5 times the Freddy's franchise and all the big back and all that. And now there are so many, because people at first people were just up in arms about it being copied and how people are copying and making things, and there's like there's SpongeBob versions, there's this version, but then it became that there's now it's a legitimate genre with the restaurant more survival franchise genre. They got the genre, that's a real thing now. It's something that's copied enough, it's a protected genre.
Yep.
All right. Let's start here.
Outside of don't do this thing, if you could go back in time and give yourself advice at the very beginning of embarking on game design, what would that piece of advice that you give yourself?
Oh my gosh. That's a good question. Don't be afraid to talk to your fellow designers. Like when I got into game design, I was so terrified that everyone would think that I was stupid and didn't know what I was doing. And that's a huge anxiety thing for a lot of us with, imposter syndrome or CPTSD or whatever. Talk to your fellow game designers. They are your best resource.
This is an industry of small names and big egos. Do not have a big ego. Don't be that. Always strive for a little bit of humility and just be amiable and be courteous to other people and your fellow designers. They put in a lot of work at the time. And if they're dicks to you, then okay, whatever. But you're not the one being a dick. And if someone wants to come up to you for advice, as much as you're comfortable with doing for free, do it for them.
Go ahead.
At what point, I know you're not lawyers, at what point in the design process do you start thinking about, I need to copyright this, I need to trademark this, or I'm going to see it everywhere else?
I don't. Like that, sorry.
Yeah. If you're using mechanics that are named and you come up with these decisive names for them, and they're new and innovative and whatever, then maybe that's the time to start thinking about them. But we're not IP lawyers.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't speak to those things. In terms of lifting wholesale mechanics or the systems, a lot of times, a lot of those games will have system resource documents, or they'll have open game licenses. Forged in the Dark, which Jax has mentioned a couple times, started with a game called Blades in the Dark, which is a very mutated form of Powered by the Apocalypse.
Yep.
And it's completely different, and it runs different, and the things that work in one don't necessarily translate to the other, but you can see the line of descent.
Yep.
Clearly, Powered by the Apocalypse was one of this thing's parents.
Yep.
So,
And I believe the original game does still credit Powered by the Apocalypse.
it does, and I believe they contacted the Bakers. John Harper contacted the Bakers and was like, "Hey, can I do this?" And they were like, "Yes."
Yeah. If you're not sure, ask. I saw a hand right here, and then I'll go to you guys in the back.
How important are accessories to TTRPGs? So like D&D has dice, mechanics, I mean, they're probably enough for each other.
They sure do.
Yeah. Exactly. Do you guys feel like those kind of accessories are important to a game, or do you feel like you don't need that? Like, what are your opinions?
I'm not sure my opinion really matters on that. I personally, as a designer, don't really think about, oh my god, I should get custom dice or whatever. I understand that they can be good marketing tools, but I think it really depends at the end of the day who wants what out of your game. Like, I know there are people who want custom D10s for Vampire, and like, if there's a way to provide that, great. But I guess the best way is see what your market wants and then go from there.
Yeah, I will note two things. I've seen many a tabletop role-playing Kickstarter fail because they promised custom dice and
Yep.
T-shirts and like vinyl prints and those sorts of things. That'll cost money. That'll cost
Yeah.
a lot of money to manufacture and then to ship. And if you don't have quotes locked in, if you don't have an expectation of how well the Kickstarter is going to do, if you don't have any of that beforehand, it is a fool's gambit to promise those things
Yeah.
and to buy into them beforehand. In terms of whether you should use accessories in the core gameplay loop itself and in the game itself, I think that's really dependent on what the game is. The Genesis system, which the Star Wars games use, has custom funky dice. And yeah, you can use your dice and translate them, but they have symbols on them in the Star Wars version. And I've never been able to use the actual dice for those games. It just, I'm like, okay, what does that symbol mean? I forget.
Yeah.
If you use an online dice roller, it'll just pop out with what the answer is and what the total thing is.
Yeah. Dice rollers are fun.
Yeah,
They're much cheaper to make than custom dice.
yeah. Designing for actual in-person at the table play is subtly different than designing for over Discord or over another kind of virtual tabletop. And you have different tools available to you on those. So when you're designing your game and your core gameplay, you can think about things that will play directly into something that plays to those strengths. But you should also be open about that and never be afraid of directly addressing the reader or the game master, if you have a game master at all,
Yeah.
about what your intentions are.
Yeah, I think that's another big mistake people make is, they'll figure out my game if they just read it. And like, sometimes you just got to tell people, hey, my game is about this. I'll start with you and then we'll go to you.
So, we want to discuss about sort of the feedback from people and responding to constructive criticism on various things. There's talk about small names of people. And I was curious if you would have advice for a hypothetical person
Uh-oh.
who understands the need for constructive criticism and intellectually genuinely desires it, but is, let's say, not always great at taking it.
What's your name? Sorry? Brendan. Okay, so Brandon, the hypothetical person who is not Brendan. What? Yeah, him. Brandon, not Brendan. It's a hypothetical person, I said that. Really wants constructive criticism, but is not great at taking it.
Literally every game designer I know.
Yeah. Welcome, Brandon, hypothetical person, to the ranks. Like, I have been to game designing for 5 years, and when I get red lines back, which are edits, I still go, oh no. What are they saying about me? Frick.
Yeah, and I'm like, they don't understand my genius. Those fools. How dare they? Who do they think they are?
They don't understand my art. He sobbed over his crushed wildflowers. But no, like, I have a lot of anxiety. I have a lot of different anxiety disorders. Sometimes I take constructive criticism as very personal, and like, it's hard. I'm not going to lie to you. It's hard to get over that, but talking to the person who is giving it to you is really helpful. Like, oh God, when I read my red lines for Vampire the Requiem the first time, I had to go to my developer, who is Danielle Harper, who is one of my closest friends at this point, and be like, is this normal? Did I do a bad job? She's like, no, you did great, but here are things I need you to fix. I'm like, are you gonna hire me again? Am I a bad designer? Yes, Jax, you're fine. I'm gonna hire you. You're great, but you need to take care of these things. And realizing that it's not about you, it's about the text as presented outside of yourself. And like, we could get into the whole philosophy of death of the author and whatever. And I think in tabletops it's actually a lot more true than it is in novels, because you're going to have all of these names, and more often than not, like on Changeling, it doesn't say under Neil's section that Neil wrote Loyalists, and it doesn't say under my section that I wrote the Kiths and the Tokens. So you're not going to know who wrote what, so people are just going to take it as a manual, and they're not going to see your name attached to a specific chunk of text. So it's more about how nicely your text plays with others. And it becomes less about you as a person and more about how your writing locks in with that of others. And it's tricky, and sometimes you'll need to take a Xanax. Please do not take a Xanax unless it's prescribed to you, but I'm not your dad. And like, yeah, you'll need to chill out and probably revisit it. It's okay to take time to work on your red lines. It's okay to take time to process criticism, so long as you're not lashing out about it.
Yeah. Jax, remind me, what's that thing that's comorbid with ADD where you get real mad about rejection, and you avoid it?
That, my dear Neil, is called rejection-sensitive dysphoria.
There you go.
We both have ADHD. Hi.
Yeah, totally.
You're gonna meet a lot of neurodivergent game designers. So many.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, and a lot of LGBTQ ones as well.
Yes.
So I never respond, no matter what my feelings are. It is an ironclad law. I do not respond immediately, because I will have that emotional response, and I will have that like knee jerk thing. Take a walk, take a day, take a week.
Yep.
And just come back to it. And eventually you're like, no, this person's right. Or
Yep.
they don't quite understand what I was going for, but I want to communicate that to them directly.
There is one exception, and I will tell you the anecdote of Scarebnb, which is that I submitted Scarebnb to a Halloween game jam, and the person who was hosting the game jam, I charged $3.99 for this game. This game that was maybe 10 or 12 pages, had a full color cover, table stuff. The guy who's hosting the jam, who's a video game designer, writes this long ass comment on my itch.io page going, "Oh, this is just a money grab. You haven't posted screenshots of your video game at all. You don't understand how to do game design. You're just a scammer." And I got mad. I literally just posted his comment as one of the pull quotes for the game. And I was like, yes. And then this game proudly got last place in that game jam. Go team. Don't do it. Unless you are an established designer, probably don't do that. But there are some people who will be wrong, and it can be difficult to tell apart the people who are just being malicious from the people who want to give you constructive criticism, but I promise it will come easier to you. Usually the people who are giving you constructive criticism, even if they're being jerks about it, will make sure to tell you some part of the game that they like, and will actually be clear and obvious about that they read the game, right? Like, one of the most valuable things I have ever been told, and I think it was actually by Ian Watson, was if they didn't like your writing, they wouldn't have spent all of this time editing your writing. They could have just gone, "Oh, I hate this," and then tapped someone else to write it, or not played the game, or whatever. But somebody investing time into the thing you are doing is usually a sign that they love it and they want to see it succeed.
Yeah, absolutely.
I saw a hand back there too.
Hi, I want to double back to the copyright thing real quick. I'm a lawyer.
Hooray!
If you are planning on monetizing your game or anything for that matter, most copyright lawyers will do a free application of some sort. And it is always better safe than sorry to reach out and at least ask if you are thinking about selling something and you have borrowed, adapted, whatever, something from somebody else, please shoot a lawyer an email. It is so much better than not doing that and having to pay way more legal fees down.
Man, why
Yep.
aren't they on our panel, Neil?
I don't know. I thought about getting a law degree, and I decided on data science instead, and it was a huge mistake, apparently.
We have 10 minutes. You want to come up and sit on the panel? Come on up. No, I'm serious. Woo!
Yay!
I am now in control of the.
You do have
I
a,
know that I'm not an IP lawyer.
you do have a JD, right? We're not talking like a Master of Laws here, because
I'm a practicing attorney.
yeah, an actual law degree, not a degree in law.
Well, this is part of that.
So, what's your name? Where are you from?
I'm Alice O'Connell. I'm from Chicago, Illinois. I am a prosecutor in Chicago.
Hell
Cool.
yeah. Good for you.
Thanks. It's a lot.
I know. Bum bum. I actually have like the Law and Order sound effect on my phone.
I want to make a bunch of jokes about prohibition and busting bootleggers, but we'll just get to the
They
IP
would all be
laws.
warranted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll just get to the IP questions.
All right, yes.
Yeah.
So I'm actually a designer, illustrator for a lot of designers research, and I love games, and I don't see this being a great space for illustrators and I know I'm moving more from like inspiration design perspective or inspiration design, but with TTO being a great space, going to have services and perhaps looking for other designers, collaborative spaces,
So Itch.io, I think, would be a great space if you wanted to do like art packs and stuff. And I believe you can also sell consultations on Itch.io. I never recommend Twitter for obvious reasons, but honestly, I think Twitter would probably be a good place to start with that. TTRPG Twitter is almost always looking for artists and illustrators of many different kinds. So posting your rates and what you do on Twitter is a great way to get that, and plenty of people will boost it. Saw a hand back there?
Nope.
No?
Someone just stretching up.
Cool. Yes.
I just like along with video, I used to do all the time. I'm actually the and also Twitter definitely is a lot of community. The one thing a lot of people miss over is Reddit, because Reddit has a lot of community.
Yep.
Yep.
You can find the specific thing you're looking for. The world building Reddit is huge. And
Oh, yeah.
feedback, ideas, criticism, whatever.
Yep.
All kinds of people, all kinds of backgrounds, from experts to newbies, and all in between. There's a really good space.
Yeah.
So that's like my suggestion. But if you're looking like art, game design, anything, Reddit will most likely have a community specifically for that thing.
Probably not lawyers, though.
It's extremely specific, which is kind of the best part.
Yeah. Probably
Yeah,
not
great
lawyers, though. You
advice.
should go to Allison for that. Allison or Alice? Alice. Go to Alice for that. All right. Anybody else? Yes.
You mentioned free consultation for something like that. What kind of feels like a word kind of valuable? What do you have before you start consultation?
Depends on the lawyer. I mean, it depends on the practice. There's a lot of solo practitioners who will talk to you about basically anything. If you're talking about a big law firm that specializes in IP and works with corporations, that's going to be trickier. But for the purposes of like a small-scale self-published game, a single practitioner who has an IP specialization can certainly talk to you for an hour or two, maybe even 3, about really whatever issues you may have. And the kind of premise that they operate under is, if indeed you are going to end up pursuing the publishing of this game, and you go and talk to this lawyer for 2 hours and they give you good advice, you might pay them down the road,
Yep.
hey, I need to file this copyright, hey, I have this thing I'm working on, can I work with you more intently? So that's kind of the social contract that's working there, is they're hoping to gain your business
Yep.
by giving you that consultation.
Yeah, and you should be careful of asking of not compensating people like for playtesters or like fellow designers or writers if you're asking them to do work. That's fine. Lawyers offering a free consult will probably tell you when you've gone far enough.
Yes.
It's also, it is important to note that while all IP lawyers are, barred, assuming that they're legal, not all IP lawyers are created equal.
Yeah.
An IP lawyer who specializes in anything close to what you're working on will always, always, always give better advice than one who does not. Yes, an IP lawyer is certified to practice law, whatever the field may be, but if they spend their entire career working on
Movies.
trademark law for fast food companies,
Yeah.
sure, they technically have area practice, but they may not be so helpful if you're talking copyright for tabletop stuff. They might not know how open licenses work. They might not know the specific intricacies of the area you're working in. So if there is specialization available, and in this wide era of the internet, it's pretty easy to get in contact with lawyers who do this specific thing, I would always resort to that if it's an option.
Yeah,
Yes.
there are plenty of lawyers who do game-specific law.
There are also plenty of lawyers who are tabletop designers who, in fact, mix that, and it's great.
I would reiterate that this is not legal advice. I am not a lawyer.
Wait,
Like-
you're not a lawyer?
Thought you
I
were?
am not your lawyer.
Yeah.
I am a lawyer.
Yeah.
Cool. That's right. Any other questions, comment? Yes.
What is it like freelancing and having
Can you speak up a little bit?
what is it like freelance writing and how do you get into that?
Hey Neil, we talked about all calls earlier.
It's true.
Let's talk a little more about that.
Plenty of companies will put out a statement of just say, hey, we want to pay this amount. We want this many words. We're soliciting inputs for a new a new game or a new system, whatever. Send us your stuff, and send you like again, follow it to the letter, but also be mindful of your time and how much they're actually asking for. If someone's asking to bring you in for like 1 cent a word,
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
And where would you find something like
You can search for them on Twitter. You can search for them on. There's a couple specialty websites that's escaping me at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Google call and stuff like that?
Yeah,
Sort of.
yeah.
I know Onyx Path Publishing, which does all of the Chronicles of Darkness, World of Darkness stuff right now, usually has an ongoing all call that you can find under submissions. Neil and I both work for Onyx Path, so that's how we got started, I think.
Yeah.
We both got started.
Yeah, and there are a lot of community options available now. Many different companies have jumped onto the DMs Guild bandwagon and allow people to produce content for sale that's under their IP. If you're going to try to solicit a specific company, it might be worth just putting out a couple examples of the design, and in response to their all call saying, hey, I also did these products on DM's Guild. And I know whenever someone does that for Onyx Path, I go and I look at the Storyteller's Vault or whatever, and at their stuff, and I see if it's up to snuff. Or I see if it's painfully offensive or something like that, and sometimes it is, and I'm like, not hiring you, buddy. But that's a good way to get practice, and like Itch.io, a good way to establish yourself as a name, and then seek greater recognition. And once you have a few actual freelancing titles on your belt,
People will start coming to you.
yes.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Well, thank you so much, Alice, for jumping on our panel in the last 10 minutes. I really appreciate it. Can we get a round of applause for Alice? Yeah, thank you all so much for coming to our panel. We have like 2 minutes left. So, Neil, where can they find you on the internet?
Sure, you can find me at Burnt Neal, BURNTNEALL on Twitter. That's a reference to the Icelandic saga of Burnt Njal, and it's a reference I regret making now because nobody ever gets it, but at this point I'm too invested to change it. You can find me at Instagram the same way, and you can contact me through either of those venues.
You can find me on Twitter at Rufflejax, RUFFLEJAX. I'm on most social media as Rufflejax. You can find my Linktree, which has all of my other stuff, at Linktree/Rufflejax. I'm on Itch.io as Rufflejax. It is not difficult to find me because I use the same name most places. Alice, if we need a prosecutor, where do we find you?
Please do not find me.
Okay. Spoken like a lawyer. All right, thank you all so much for coming to our panel, and thank you so much to Alice for guesting for the last 10 minutes. I promise they're not a plant. We really did just do this to a very nice lawyer from Chicago. But have a wonderful MAGFest, everyone.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for jumping on.
Pleasure. Yeah, that works.
Thank you for jumping on.
Yeah,
for
I
that.
felt bad. I didn't want to stick my head in anywhere.
We
but I also wanted to-
appreciated it, seriously.
There's been a couple of IP lawyers who popped into some of these panels.
There's a lot of lawyers who play tabletop.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Sorry, is it all right if I ask one question? I was about to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right, graphic.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
So I was curious, like, I'm starting to really work creatively, and one of the things why I've tried to work with tabletop is I feel that